下午好。
Good afternoon.
今天有机会来到
I'm very pleased to come here to the National Congress of Brazil and meet all the friends. On behalf of the Chinese government and people, the cordial greetings and best wishes to the hospitable and friendly Brazilian people and to all the people in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Brazil deserves a lot more attention than it typically gets in Western discourse.
We're worried about what's happening all over the world, except in our own backyard.
China-Brazil relations and China-Latin America relations keep moving forward like the Yangtze River and the Amazon River.
It's really striking the amount of control that China already has.
A China não está comprando no Brasil, ela está comprando o Brasil.
They know what they want from Brazil. They know how Brazil can play a role in their rise.
We're being leveraged, we're being encircled. We're going to wake up one day and we're going to be very, very surprised and very upset. And then people are going to ask, how did this happen? And the answer is we let it happen.
In 1823, President James Monroe announced a policy that has been the center of American foreign policy for the last 200 years. Called the Monroe Doctrine, it has a very simple thesis. Great powers would not be allowed to control nations in the Western Hemisphere. That would be a direct threat to the interests of the United States, and for 200 years, we haven't allowed it. Under the Biden administration, the Monroe Doctrine is no longer enforced. Constrained by its ideological concerns, consumed with petty political grievances, and above all, distracted by a faraway war in Eastern Europe, the Biden administration has abdicated its responsibility. And into the void left by the United States moves a new superpower. We've come to Brazil to see for ourselves the rise of China and how the government of China is replacing the United States as the dominant power in our hemisphere.
One of the first things you notice about Brazil when you get here is how enormous it is. The country is bigger than the continental United States, has a population of over 200 million people. Huge economy. They build airplanes here. It's not really a third world country, it's a developed country. It's the 9th largest economy in the world. And 20 years ago, the United States was Brazil's largest trading partner. That makes sense. It's our hemisphere.
Until 2009, Brazil had U.S. as its main trade partner. And then 2009, China took over, and China became so much powerful in Brazil.
Felipe Martins is the chief foreign policy advisor to the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro.
No one in Brazil was aware of how to deal with China. And at the same time, in China, they knew very clearly what they wanted from Brazil.
China's problem is simple. It doesn't have the natural resources it needs to sustain its huge population and its massive growth rate. That's why South America is so important to China. Brazil has millions of acres of fertile farmland, raw timber, massive deposits of essential minerals like iron ore, nickel, petroleum, rare earth elements, phosphates, and tin. All of these are essential components for China's manufacturing economy.
目前建造的这个平台 It's very clear that they think about Brazil as a source of food and other things they need to keep the machinery going on.
In 2010, the Wuhan Iron Steel Company spent more than $5 billion on mining rights in Brazil. That same year, the Chinese state-owned oil company Sinopec spent more than $17 billion to acquire the rights to Brazil's oil deposits. The list goes on. Since 2005, the Chinese spent more than $70 billion in Brazil.
Derek Scissors maintains a website that tracks Chinese investment and construction.
Late 2004, I started following Chinese investment around the world. There have been these waves. The nature of it, I think, has progressed from just looking for commodities extraction, iron ore, copper, oil, to also now providing more complex infrastructure.
As recently as 2007, there was almost no Chinese investment in this country, but today the Chinese firms with close ties to the Communist Party are buying Brazil's natural resources, building infrastructure across the country, and building public support in Brazil by controlling media outlets, Communist Party propaganda outlets like Xinhua, the People's Daily, and China Radio International produce Portuguese language content for Brazil's audiences.
That is absolutely typical, and it is to win the hearts and minds, but at least, mollify the hearts and minds of the countries that they're operating in.
The parent company of CGTN, China Media Group, has signed a memorandum of cooperation with Brazil's Grupo Globo.
The largest media company in Brazil now co-produces television dramas and films with Chinese state media.
The two sides will partner in film and television dramas, sports, entertainment, and 5G technology.
And they are developing shows, TV series, soap operas together with Globo to showcase what's going on in China as a model for Brazil.
That is part of the Chinese strategy. They do have resources. It is extremely biased, as you can imagine. They're trying to shape Brazilians' view of the world and view of China.
Through China Zone, the Brazilian people can watch Chinese movies, TV programs, documentaries, cartoons, and other audiovisual content to learn more about China.
If you control a country's infrastructure, you control the country. And to that end, the Chinese government has spent billions of dollars here in Brazil on electrical grids, transportation, and shipping ports. In Sao Paulo, the biggest and richest city in Brazil, a Chinese company is even extending the metro.
China was getting positions here in Brazil as we are getting rid of state companies, as we're getting privatization process going on here in Brazil during the 90s and 2000s. They were buying more and more companies.
They go into a country and they basically say, here's billions of dollars. In some cases, they'll tell leaders, and here's a few million for your family. And we want to build the roads, we want to control your country. No one's paying attention to it.
Senator Marco Rubio of Florida is one of the very few elected officials in Washington who's worried about China's rising influence in Latin America.
Every company in China, no matter how private they claim to be, is controlled by the Communist Party because they wouldn't exist if the Communist Party didn't want them to exist.
One of China's biggest targets is the power grid. Since 2010, the Chinese state-owned power company, called State Grid, has spent billions on Brazil's energy infrastructure.
State Grid might be the biggest company in the world, depending on how you measure it. If you're the State Grid chairman, you're a member of the party, and your freedom depends on the party being happy with your behavior.
In 2019, in the northern state of Para, State Grid completed construction of the fourth largest hydroelectric dam in the world. To get that power to the population centers in the southern part of the country, they bulldozed a corridor right through the heart of the Amazon rainforest.
The large projects, the multi-billion-dollar projects, those are done with the CCP's approval.
So we're in Rio on a beautiful winter morning. We're about to get in a helicopter. Typically when you get in a helicopter, you avoid power lines. That's rule one. Today we're going in search of power lines. We're seeking them out because they're Chinese power lines. This is a central part of Brazil's power grid, owned and operated by the Chinese government. From the air, it's very obvious how enormous and fertile and mineral-rich this country is. It's not Ecuador. Brazil's a very rich country, particularly in its mineral wealth. And you can see why the Chinese government would be obsessed on colonizing it, and they are. There's a bill in the Brazilian Congress right now that would allow politicians to sell the country's natural resources to China. Kind of like what private equity did to our manufacturing sector, but on a bigger scale. Bolsonaro opposes it because if another country controls your natural resources, it's not really your country anymore. But there's a lot of pressure to do it because it's incredibly lucrative to a small number of people. All right, we're flying over the terminus of one of the longest power corridors in the world. It runs for more than 1,500 miles from the headwaters of the Amazon River to outside Rio, where we are now, and it supplies power to 22 million people, the big population center in Brazil. And it's owned by the Chinese government, which built it, owns it, maintains it. The company is called State Grid, but not the Brazilian state, the Chinese state.
What the state ownership means is when the government wants you to do something, you do it. You don't have recourse to the courts, you don't have recourse in your own decision making, it's over. If it becomes important to the CCP, then State Grid has to follow their orders again. If Brazil were to say, we're really upset about something China's doing and we're going to stop shipping you the commodities you buy from China, iron ore, soybeans, and so on, which would hurt Brazil too. But if they were to make that decision, the CCP would tell State Grid to remind the Brazilian government that Brazil needs state grid.
Owning and operating the power grid does more than simply give China leverage over Brazilian leaders. It also makes resource extraction easier and more reliable. But it's not the only infrastructure they need. In order to get commodities to China, they need a way to ship them.
My name is Arthur Weintraub. I am a law professor in the Federal University in Brazil.
Arthur Weintraub is an academic and an author. He served in President Jair Bolsonaro's administration. Now he's running for office in a different party.
Now we are going to the port of Santos. It is the biggest port in this part of the world.
By population, Santos is about the same size as Atlanta. It's just a 2-hour drive from the city of Sao Paulo, which is roughly the population of New York City and Chicago combined. The region is the economic center of all of Latin America. The port of Santos ships about as much tonnage as the port of Tokyo.
Brazil is the biggest economy in Latin America, and São Paulo is a third of the GDP.
In March, a Chinese state-owned company called COFCO, which is the largest food processor in China, secured a long-term lease for a bulk terminal at the port of Santos.
We are losing all Latin America. I'm afraid even to speak right now. I'm afraid of being arrested in Brazil. There's this risk, if you speak openly, you can be arrested.
Weintraub took us to the terminal.
All you can look, even the small things, the cargoes, the port, the containers, everything is Chinese lease. This is the backbone of the economy in Brazil. So if they shut down that, it's over for us. Imagine all the food that Brazil exports to the world. If there's a shutdown, the control that China can have, not only with Brazilian economy, but all the countries that buy food from Brazil.
All along Brazil's lengthy Atlantic coast, the Chinese are building ports.
Those port ownership are not as important to the Brazilian economy as ownership of the power grid and investment in the power grid, but it's important for the U.S. strategically.
North of Santos, the port of Açu has a 2-mile-long pier nicknamed the Highway to China. When it opened, a nearby local town started offering free Mandarin lessons to locals who wanted to work with the Chinese businessmen traveling to the area. Further north, in the city of São Luís, not far from the Caribbean, they're building another port. This will be controlled by the state-owned China Communications Construction Corporation.
Common sense gun laws are not about your personal feelings or beliefs. You are elected because you have been chosen and are trusted to protect us. But let me say to you here today, I do not feel protected. No citizen needs an AR-15. These weapons are designed to do the most harm in the least amount of time. And on Saturday, May 14th, it took a domestic terrorist just 2 minutes to shoot and kill 10 people and injure 3 others. If after hearing from me and the other people testifying here today does not move you to act on gun laws, I invite you to my home to help me clean Zaire's wounds so that you may see up close the damage that has been caused to my son and to my community.
He is America. He shouldn't be here.
Zanetta Everhart doesn't know how her son survived, but she feels blessed he's still here with her. Zaire Goodman was working Saturday afternoon at Tops Friendly Markets on Jefferson Avenue when the unthinkable happened.
Zaire called me, and he said, Mom, get here now, I got shot.
Zanetta says Zaire was helping a woman in the parking lot when the gunman got out of his car and shot both of them. Zaire dropped to the ground. Then once the shooter went inside, he ran away with another employee and called his mom. A bullet went through Zaire's lower neck and out his back. Somehow, the damage was minimal. No surgery, not even any stitches.
The universe spun a little bit stronger for my child that day. I don't know what divine being was out there watching over him, but I'm grateful.
Stupid. My son, Zaire, has a hole in the right side of his neck, 2 on his back, and another on his left leg.
He ran away with another employee.
2 on his back and another on his left leg.
He ran away with another employee. A bullet went through Zaire's lower neck and out his back. Somehow, the damage was minimal. No surgery, not even any stitches.
Side of his neck, 2 on his back, and another on his left leg.
Another port. This will be controlled by the state-owned China Communications Construction Corporation.
China Communications Construction Corp. We refer to it in our data set as C4 because I don't want to have to say that every single time. It is what it sounds like. They will build ports, they'll build roads. If China Communications Construction owns a port, does that make it easier for Chinese military users? Probably.
Why would China need to build naval bases around the world? They won't need to build naval bases. They'll have visiting rights to basically nationalize and operationalize any port they control in the world in the time of conflict if necessary. And there won't be anything we can do about it.
China was able to get a foothold in Brazil because many in that country's political class are for sale. All three of Brazil's presidents from 2003 to 2017 are openly pro-China. In 2021, one of them, a notoriously unpopular former president called Michel Temer, was hired by the Chinese telecom company Huawei to be a, quote, advisor. The other two former presidents, Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff, routinely give speeches attacking the United States and praising the Chinese model. Anger over the scale of Chinese investments in Brazil helped fuel the rise of President Jair Bolsonaro, who was a political outsider. As a candidate, he ferociously attacked China.
A China não está comprando no Brasil, ela está comprando o Brasil.
During the pandemic, the Bolsonaro government became openly hostile to China. Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, a member of Congress here, said the, quote, Chinese dictatorship caused the pandemic. Bolsonaro's former education minister, Abraham Weintraub, said on Twitter the pandemic was part of China's, quote, infallible plan for world domination.
The Communist Party responded with total ferocity. The Chinese ambassador to Brazil threatened retaliation and demanded the Bolsonaro administration apologize for daring to criticize China. It was a serious threat. Today, the Bolsonaro administration is taking a much softer tone on China. So we're on the presidential grounds in this enormous compound in Brasilia where the president lives. We're about to sit down with President Bolsonaro to ask him about China's attempts to make this country, Brazil, into a colony of China.
Are you worried about the level of Chinese investment in Brazil?
Olha, eu gostaria que os americanos também participassem de investimentos no Brasil. Nós temos comércio com a China.
China owns parts of Brazil's power grid, a major port. Is it harder to criticize China if they have that much control over your infrastructure?
A minha política de privatização foi diferente de quem me antecedeu. Agora, os estados também têm autonomia para privatizar o que é deles. Grande parte de São Paulo foi privatizado com a China. O ex-governador, João Dória, tinha uma ligação muito forte com a China. Privatizar, mas de certa forma dar uma garantia para a gente que aquilo privatizado não era daquele país, diferentemente de outros presidentes e de outros governadores.
To his credit, Bolsonaro has resisted efforts by lawmakers to sell off Brazilian land. He opposed the introduction of Chinese-made vaccines, and he has made efforts to get the U.S. to invest in his country.
Por exemplo, tinha conversado com o ex-presidente Trump sobre a questão do nióbio no Brasil. Porque é uma coisa que só no mundo todo, 98% das reservas estão aqui. Isso parou, congelou no tempo.
The election of an openly pro-American president was a rare opportunity for the United States to reset relations with Brazil and reestablish influence there. But the Democratic Party, enraged by Bolsonaro's conservative views on social issues, took a pass.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. The foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping.
Last summer, nearly 24 House Democrats sent a letter to the Biden administration attacking Bolsonaro by name.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
In 2021, a group of left-wing celebrities, including Jane Fonda, Alec Baldwin, Mark Ruffalo, and Leonardo DiCaprio, sent a letter to Joe Biden demanding that he not make deals with Bolsonaro because of the deforestation of the Amazon. Ironically, deforestation in the Amazon is a direct consequence of China extracting resources from the area. Biden may be ignoring Brazil for another reason. It turns out that our leaders may be just as much for sale as Brazil's. In the years preceding his presidency, Biden's son Hunter made $31 million from business deals in China. Some of those deals were with people who have direct ties to Chinese intelligence. Apparently, it had an effect on Joe Biden.
In Joe Biden's first year as president, how many times did you speak to him?
Uma vez apenas.
Biden snubbed Bolsonaro at a G20 conference.
Presidente degli Stati Uniti d'America.
Traditionally, developing countries will try to leverage great powers to get the best deal they can out of both sides. But in this case, America's not even at the table. All we do is show up and lecture them about stuff.
Na linha, ombreado com o povo americano, como ocidentais de verdade.
They'd rather work with us and not with the Chinese. But if the choice is between nothing and China, they're going to choose China because they need it.
Washington is simply too distracted by pointless foreign wars to even notice what's going on in our hemisphere.
The number one threat we need to be focused on is the Communist Party of China. And the Western Hemisphere is one of the places where they're really beginning to invest. Since the end of the Cold War, the Western Hemisphere has been largely ignored.
Early this morning, forces from 6 Caribbean democracies and the United States began a landing on the island of Grenada.
During the Cold War, it was the United States being this gigantic superpower hovering in the region with the Monroe Doctrine, the belief that everything that happened in Latin America was the quote-unquote backdoor of the United States. For the longest time, it was the United States that occupied that role of being the single most important country by far in terms of understanding Brazilian politics. After 9/11, the United States became almost singularly obsessed with the Middle East. And so you see this US obsession with this one part of the world, essentially at the expense of the entire rest of the world. We stayed invested in the Middle East while China continued to just grow and grow and grow and grow. The Biden administration began talking a big game about how they recognized China as the great competitor and how they were going to do so much in order to confront China.
China and other countries are closing in fast.
And instead, what has happened is exactly the opposite. The Biden administration, because of its obsession with Ukraine, has managed to do what foreign policy experts in both parties stridently warned had to be avoided, which is driving China and Russia together at exactly the time that China has clearly become by far the most formidable competitor to US power since the end of World War II. And now China is almost certainly the most important country in terms of exerting influence within Brazil.
The future of Brazil, the largest economy in Latin America, will be decided this fall during a presidential election. Bolsonaro faces off against a former president, a leftist, called Luiz Lula da Silva.
Lula da Silva. He's kind of like Obama in the sense that he's just a once-in-a-generation political talent. Whatever you think of him, nobody can deny just his raw political skills.
Não adianta tentar acabar, sabe, com as minhas ideias. Elas já estão pairando no ar e não tem como prendê-las.
If Bolsonaro loses that election, China will certainly dominate Brazil.
E o Brasil, no meu entender, é o país mais cobiçado no mundo que existe no momento.
What is your opponent Lula's view of China?
Ele tem dado declarações aqui de defesa do regime chinês.
E a China tem um partido que tem poder, que tem um Estado forte, que toma decisões e que as pessoas cumprem.
China has directly interfered in the domestic politics of countries throughout Latin America, and that's particularly true here in Brazil.
Ou seja, a evolução que os chineses tiveram nos últimos 20 anos foi uma coisa extraordinária. E isso só é possível pela organização política chinesa.
Since 2002, the Chinese Communist Party has held more than 300 party-to-party meetings with rising politicians throughout Latin America. Politicians they believe will serve Chinese interests once they take power.
A China é exemplo, sabe, de desenvolvimento para o mundo.
In the past year, traditionally conservative governments like those in Chile and Colombia have been replaced by far-left leaders sympathetic to China. Bolsonaro is the only remaining pro-American head of state in all of South America. From China's perspective, Lula is the perfect candidate. If China wants to make Brazil effectively a colony and Lula is in favor of China, doesn't that give China incentive to interfere in your election? And do you have evidence that that is happening?
Olha, não posso desconfiar de outro país nesse sentido, né? Essas questões de estratégia trata aqui reservadamente. Mas há um interesse de vários países no Brasil. Só o nosso potencial do agronegócio para alimentar
China may not be the only government rooting for Lula.
There's no doubt in my mind that this administration wants Bolsonaro to lose and his opponent to win because they think he'll be more compliant with their agenda. It doesn't matter to them whether America's national interest is hurt, because for them this is about spreading some globalist ideology on as many countries as possible at the expense of the interest of Americans, American workers, and our national security.
As American domestic politics has been dominated by micro issues like George Floyd and trans rights, the Chinese government has been busy taking over the world. Since 2005, the Chinese have spent more than $2 trillion on foreign investment and infrastructure construction. China now controls the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, energy grids, roads, ports, in nations around the world, in Africa and here in Latin America. There is one government left in South America that is sympathetic to the United States, and it's this one here in Brazil. But it's being ignored by the Biden administration for ideological reasons. When the smoke clears, China may control Brazil too.